Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's session. My name is James Catridge. I am one of the network leads for the Creative Industries Research and Innovation Network here at Oxford Brookes University. Today's session is entitled, How Can Mentoring Build Back Stronger and More Resilient Creative Industries? And it forms part of a larger series of events. We're having events all through May. The Creative Industries Festival, this is our first edition of the festival in 2021. And there's loads more events coming up. If you want to check out the programme, there'll be a link in the chat, which my colleague will post, hopefully. So without further ado, I'll introduce, actually just a couple of housekeeping notices before we start. This meeting is being recorded. The recording will be made available publicly at a later date, probably on our website. So if you don't wish to be recorded, just keep your camera off and you can communicate with us via the chat, and then you will not appear in the recording. And whilst we're talking about the chat we like to use as a space for people to post questions during the event, but also as a kind of social replacement for all the other stuff that would go alongside a normal conference. So if you want to introduce yourselves, we really like hearing where everybody is from and what your jobs are. It really helps us to build a sense of who's here today, and it helps with the discussion at the end. So please introduce yourself in the chat if you get a second. So that's all from me. I'm going to introduce our panel chair, Dr Judie Gannon, who is a senior lecturer in the International Centre for Coaching and Mentoring Studies here at Oxford Brookes University. And Judie recently won a European Mentoring Coaching Award winner for 2019. Sorry, I mangled that up, but she won an award. And so here's Judie, and I'll let Judie take it away. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, James. It's great to be here at the Creative Industries Festival. And I'm really delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel displaying some of the best expertise in mentoring in the creative industries. So I have Dr. Joe Miller with me. Do you want to give a wave, Joe? Hi, thanks, Joe. And I've got Carys Nelkon from Arts Emergency. Thanks, Carys. I've got Tamsin Russell from the Museums Association. Thanks, Tamsin. And I've got Louise McAward-White from the BFI. And really the idea behind this panel is that we want to look at mentoring in the creative industries. What does mentoring bring to these sectors? What's the provision like of mentoring across the sectors in the creative industries? And how have mentoring initiatives been coping since COVID? And how are they supporting the build back for the creative industries? So I shall start sharing my screen and we'll go from there. So you've heard a little bit about who we are in front of you, your panel, and we'll be taking you through a little bit of an insight into the history and structure of mentoring provision in the creative industries, and also thinking a little bit more about the opportunities and challenges facing mentoring in the creative industries. And as I've identified, we have a really great panel joining us, and we'll be looking at some of the challenges that these 4 different schemes and scheme coordinators have, the challenges that they faced during this time, and how they developed their schemes and how they're working forward. So a little bit from the research that I've done on mentoring schemes to provide a focus for our investigations this afternoon. So we know from the literature that actually there's been a tremendous amount of informal mentoring taking place for many years across the creative industries. And there has been, in more recent years, quite a pronounced shift towards formal mentoring initiatives, and that's mainly been driven by issues of diversity and inclusivity and growth, because after all, informal mentoring often means that we're more likely to be mentoring those who are similar to us, and those who would gain access to various sectors of the creative industries and professionally develop within the creative industries may then be limited in terms of diversity and inclusivity issues. So formal mentoring has really picked up this issue and provides an awful lot of traction in terms of thinking about how we can really organise access and development within the diverse sectors across the creative industries. So I did some research back in 2019 that used a survey and interviews across a variety of different sectors. What was very interesting was that there were all 9 sectors of the creative industries were identified in our initial search for mentoring schemes. And actually at the first trawl, there were over 70 mentoring initiatives just from the creative industries. There was also a massive variety in kind of the size and scale of mentoring initiatives in the creative industries, from those that are quite bespoke or bijou, maybe 10 pairings of mentoring, to those that run up into the hundreds in terms of mentoring pairs, and those schemes that are actually networked across geographical areas. So a real diversity in terms of provision. What's also interesting is that the creative industries is one of those areas that has a huge amount of professional development, but right through from access from school, college, university, different career stages, a focus on independence and a focus on moving into business. So there's a really kind of diverse range of aspects there in terms of mentoring provision. And also this is kind of there's another dimension to this, which is where the diversity issues are really addressed in mentoring schemes in the creative industries from our survey. So there were schemes that looked specifically at widening participation from maybe what we traditionally call social class or background metrics, from particular gender metrics, and then from ethnicity and race. So there were mentoring schemes with specific focus, not only on particular parts of the industry, but also those particular areas. So really a very strong argument there in terms of inclusivity being addressed as part of mentoring schemes. So actually, for those who haven't done it yet, managing a mentoring program is quite a challenge, because there's several different areas that you really have to focus on, design, coordinate, and develop. So some of the practical elements when we were gathering our evidence from in the 2019 survey was about how different mentoring schemes really deal with different approaches to mentoring, whether that is just dyadic mentoring, so one mentor and one mentee, or whether there are opportunities to bring together mentors and mentees and almost form communities of practice and build networks that would strengthen professional development. This was particularly evident in the creative industries examples that responded to our survey and participated in the interviews. What was also interesting about the creative industries mentoring schemes who participated in our research was that they often face some challenges towards recruitment. So recruiting and retaining the right number of, in particular, mentors, because there was such a demand for mentors from other schemes as well. So that's an issue that we might come across later on when we hear from our panelists. There was also a very clear commitment to training and to supporting mentors, which is obviously enhances mentoring scheme outcomes. There was also a strong commitment and a level of ingenuity, I'll put it like that, and innovativeness in terms of how mentoring schemes were evaluated in the creative industries. And that probably directly reflects the nature of the sector itself. So the real issues about this were that the findings were that it was incredibly challenging to often develop a mentoring scheme and to create that year-on-year or cohort upon cohort sustainability and focus. And I think that's what's really interesting to hear from our panelists today. And in particular, if that was pre-COVID, actually what's it been like during COVID? And what are the mentoring schemes we're hearing from today actually doing in terms of supporting development of the industries going forward? So I will stop sharing, and the first panelist we'll hear from is Dr. Jo Miller. Take it away, Jo.
Thank you, Judy. And I've got a few slides to share in a moment, but first, my title is Extending Connectivity Under COVID, and the focus is really on how transferring face-to-face mentoring online has extended opportunities for our mentoring programme. We all know the cons of online platforms, and I want to look at some of the pros, particularly the shift from the one-to-one bubble, if you like, of the mentor-mentee partnership to a broader and more dispersed network of support. So I'll just share my slides. Now, my project is called Trad Mentor. We're based in Scotland. I'm in Stirling, in central Scotland, but as you'll hear, we have participants from all over the country. And here's how it works. We are under the auspices of an organisation called Traditional Arts and Culture Scotland, and within that we have a traditional music forum, and it has many members from individuals to organisations, community groups, right through to higher education. And I'm the coordinator of Trad Mentor, so it's traditional musicians and traditional music. We have 6 mentors and I do a bit too, and we have scope for about 12 mentees at the moment, so we're quite a small programme and quite a new programme. This is only the second cycle of our work. And on the right of the diagram there, you'll see that we're also members of the Scottish Mentoring Network, which is a super umbrella organisation with a membership from right across Scottish society, from all sorts of third sector organisations right through to the Law Society of Scotland. So it has a huge membership and we really benefit from their support. Who do we mentor? Well, I thought I'd let you see them and also hear them. So here's a selection of some of our current mentees, all sorts of instrumentalists and singers. They are performers, many are teachers, many are composers. They also do community music, and many of them have to organise and lead projects. So they have to be versatile, and now more than ever, as you can imagine, they've lost a lot of work in the sort of performing and gigs and festival side of things, so they've had to very much adapt this year, and that's been part of the learning for all of us. I thought I'd let you hear a blast of music, just to let you know the genre that we work within. So we're also involved with dancers and storytellers and people in the broader traditional arts sector. The initial model for our programme was to be one-to-one meetings, face-to-face, over about 6 months between mentors and mentees. And the idea was that they would be close-ish geographically so that travel was possible and they could meet up. And of course, that's all gone out the window. We did have a group induction at the beginning of the programme and a feedback meeting at the end. But other than that, the focus was very much on these one-to-one partnerships. Now, what we've had to do is go online. And these have been not only for our one-to-one meetings, but of course for induction, for mentor support meetings, and Something we hadn't anticipated but has happened this year is a mentee support meeting. So the mentees have actually asked for, and those who wanted to came together themselves to become a support group for each other to hear about what was going on. This was with no presence from mentors. So that's one thing that has happened. And in my view, some of these things we've had to do have led to an experience for all of us of feeling more part of a community of participants. As Judy mentioned in her introduction, a community of practice. The other thing that it's let us do is have geographical flexibility. So I'm going to show you a map of our first year of mentor pairings, and the little coloured flags there are mentor and mentee partnerships, so that you can see the colours are close, the same colours are close together, because people would meet in coffee shops or wherever they wanted to one-to-one. Now, if you look at the current trad mentor matches on 20 to 21, you'll see that we're in fact scattered all over the country, and people who are in the Central Belt can mentor or be mentored by folk in the Highlands. And this is something that might have happened eventually in the project, but it's been accelerated because of the circumstances, and I think this has actually been an advantage. I have to say that everyone feels they would have liked to have met at least some of the time in person, and so in the future we might do a mixture, but this has been an interesting learning experience. And what the mentees and the mentors have said about this is that mentoring was important last year in something that they could continue being involved with when other work was crashing around their ears. The mentor was still there, the programme was still there, so it helped me get back on the horse, said one mentee. They said flexibility has been helpful because it's much easier to arrange meetings online perhaps than in person. And they said the togetherness of it, so feeling part of a community of practice and part of a programme that would support and sustain this work. And as you'll see, it's also been a motivation to stay engaged. So a time when folk might have felt out of the loop, a bit disheartened, not being able to work, it's kept them in touch. And not least, I think it's also been a good network for our mentors, who said it's a brilliant support network. So they too, of course, have been challenged this year, and we've been able to talk to each other and support each other as mentors. So to conclude, at Trad Mentor, we've tried to extend and reinforce connectivity over the last year despite the challenges through geographical flexibility in matching up mentors and mentees online, and also, it strikes me, redirecting financial resources, because budget that would previously have gone perhaps on travel expenses, we can now put towards perhaps more meeting time or even training more mentors. So resources we can shift around. Meetings have probably been easier to organise just on a practical level because travel's not involved. As I mentioned, mentees have been able to come together in their own network and also in the sector as a whole, because everybody's had to work harder to stay in touch. And last but not least, working online has, I think, raised the profile of our programme, because it's been easier for me as the coordinator to contribute to events like this today, and for my colleagues across Scotland and further afield to participate in them. So all of this has helped to foster networks of support online, and we hope eventually in person again. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Jo. I think it's really fascinating to hear from your scheme and how you've developed it, and the great support that you've also tapped into with the Scottish Mentoring Network. Thanks. Now we'll hear from Tamsin and the work that she does with the Museums Association. Take it away, Tamsin.
Thank you very much, Judy. I don't have any slides, but I do have a transcript of what I'm going to say. So if that appeals to anybody, you're more than welcome. I'll share it, or you can email me directly. So I work for the Museums Association, and we are the professional body for those people that work in and with heritage museums and galleries. And that in and with is important because it's not only employees, but it's also freelancers, contractors, a much broader group of people that are part of our fold. My role is workforce in its broadest sense. So that's from workforce ethics to workforce research, professional development, and careers. So I sort of span a whole variety of different things. Mentoring for me is a really important part of the programs that I run. And I'm going to talk about an existing program that we had to repurpose very quickly. And then also 3 new programs that we put in place as a direct response to COVID. What I do know, having worked in creative industries for over 20 years, is that we are an extremely generous sector. And that means that it really does enable mentoring to happen informally or formally, which is a huge positive. But equally, as somebody that manages over 150 volunteer mentors, I have to be really mindful of the capacity issues that they have. So I'm going to talk about that as well. So my presentation is as much around mentees as it is about supporting the mentors and this repositioning. So one of our core programs is called the Associateship of the Museums Association. I will now known as AMA going forward. And it's a self-directed professional development program where the most significant developmental component is mentoring. We have 300 mentees on that program at this point in time and 150 mentors. Predominantly, they used to meet face-to-face. So what happened in April 2020 is that we needed to move very, very quickly into the digital space. And that's what I want to talk about in terms of how we amended our approach. So the first thing we did was increase communication directly to our mentors from quarterly to monthly and our mentees from quarterly to weekly. I wanted to ensure that throughout their experience of furlough or working from home, redundancy, sick leave, leave through loss, whatever it might have been that might have heightened their feelings of isolation, that they felt a real sense of connection and professional belonging. So that was really important for us. With my duty of care hat on as well for my 150 volunteers, I also wanted to make sure it was really clear that we expected them to work within national and regional guidance around lockdown measures and continue to support them in terms of the expectations that they have and the needs they have as individuals around any potential face-to-face contact going forward. So that was really important, that they felt safe, supported and secure within a COVID environment. We highlighted the shift to digital mentoring, and this was very new for all of us, even though I've been mentoring myself digitally or over the phone over time, never really taken the time out to think about what that meant. So we highlighted some sort of terminology. So we talked about digital privacy and the fact that you're inviting us into your homes. We talked about the concept of digital poverty, around bandwidth, data, literacy. Not everybody was as familiar. I certainly wasn't with Zoom or Skype, back in the day. Concept of digital fatigue, and I think that's important, not just only on a day-to-day basis, and the potentially the requirement for us not to be on camera, which is absolutely fine. But equally, when I talk about the programme, the fact that I think over time, over the last 12 months, we've seen people perhaps have too many opportunities to engage and learn. And what has that meant in terms of their participation rates? And then we also just talked about inclusive perspectives. So as a mentor, you may well use tools and techniques visually side by side to support somebody's thinking, or tools and techniques. And what does that mean when you're in a digital space? So we covered all of that. I capitalised on individuals working from home and then likely to have more capacity to run mentoring refresher workshops that were always a challenge operationally for people to attend. But this has been perfect to get everybody up to speed. The other thing that we wanted to do, and it's a very recent addition, is a digital welcome for mentees. So we use David Clutterbuck's, competency for mentees and mentors, but we're running a session to ensure that mentees that might be very new to the process understand what their role is. And we've never really had the capacity to do that in the past. And so that's really exciting. We continue to review this, and every quarter I take a step back and seek feedback and review what is working and not working. So just in the last few moments, they've got about another 3 minutes, and I want to talk about the brand new programs that we put in place. So we wanted to make sure that we would be responsive to sector needs. So that could be, for example, the unknown. It could be around the fact that individuals had very bespoke needs about their own professional practice. And also the requirement that people may well feel very sort of vulnerable. And actually that one-to-one development intervention was far more appropriate than any sort of group work, potentially, especially at a leadership level. So we put in 3 new programs. So the first one was leadership mentoring, where we anticipated that those that were leaders may well find themselves in a rock and a hard place without necessarily an appropriate support network to help them. And they wouldn't want to be necessarily demonstrating a lack of direction, horizon scanning, or vulnerability to their own organisation at this particular time. So we put in leadership mentoring for leaders within the sector with our existing membership pot that were at that level, CEO, head of department level. We then also put in essential mentoring, and this was an opportunity to capitalise on technical expertise. So if I'm a curator, or I'm a learning person, or I'm a policy person, how can I meet with somebody who also works in that technical area and ask them questions about how they're responding? The programme that I was involved in primarily as a mentor was also our career conversation programme, which was a careers focused. We found lots of people's job offers were removed. They may well have been made redundant or in a position of career transition or crossroads. So we also ran those programmes. We were able to move really quickly into this digital space because we knew what we were doing around mentoring. It would have been far more difficult if we weren't feeling confident about that. We have evaluated these programs, so we know that satisfaction levels were high. So there were 200 people that went through those 3 programs in the first 3 months of last year. 90 to 95% of people were satisfied. We also then, when we reprised and combined those programs for the last part of this year, we learned. So we tweaked the language and the guidance. We made the sessions more than 1 hour to 1 hour and a half, and you really learn from our experience. What was interesting, in my final 30 seconds, was around participation profile. So we didn't do monitoring forms per se. We felt that was a stretch too far in a really difficult time for people, and not something we've done in the past. So this would have been new for us. But sort of anecdotally, and from my existing knowledge of mentees and mentors, the gender metrics are really interesting. So overwhelmingly, women applied to be mentees, men applied to be mentors, and that's been borne out in other work that I've done. The other interesting thing that we highlighted was that individuals are increasingly now asking for like-to-like mentors around inclusion. So increasingly I'm having individuals say, I'd like to have somebody that's got lived experience of neurodiversity. I'd like to have somebody that as a person of colour, so they understand my experience. And that for us has an interesting approach in terms of the additional emotionally laden work that's outside of what we might expect of a normal mentoring relationship. And then the final thing I just really wanted to highlight is that we have reprised these programs, but we haven't had as high a participation rate. So whether there is something around professional development fatigue, maybe there are more mentoring programs on the block, so there's higher competition, but we saw a decrease to 50% participation in our most recent reprise around essential mentoring. I'm going to stop speaking now and hand over to Judy for the next speaker. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Tamsin. That was great. So 2 quite different perspectives in terms of size and scale for mentoring. And now I'll hand over to Louise McAward-White to talk about the mentoring that takes place at the British Film Institute.
Thanks so much, Judy. Have you got the slides in hand? Fabulous. Brilliant. So hello, everyone. I'm Louise McAward-White, and I am actually a collection systems specialist in my normal job, which means I look after a database of objects, and basically I do fancy IT. That's how I like to describe it. But also at the BFI, I volunteered to take on leading the internal mentoring scheme for BFI staff. Next slide, please, Judy. Thank you. So just in case you are not too aware of the BFI, just a quick outline. So the BFI is the UK's lead organisation for film, television and the moving image. And our purpose is really focused around stories. So we believe that society needs stories, and we share the stories of yesterday, search for the stories of today, and shape the stories of tomorrow. And we do this through support for UK storytellers, through managing and caring for the BFI's National Archive of Film and Television, offering programs through festivals and venues, funding film making in the industry, working with the wider industry to sort of encourage the growth of screen. The BFI has around 500 to 600 staff at any one time, depending on where we are in the festival cycle. And staff are split across 4 sites. So we have 2 sites in London, the South Bank Cinema, which some of you may have been to, the Central London offices, the BFI National Archive in Hertfordshire, and the Master Film Store out in Warwickshire. Next slide, please, Judy. So what is the BFI's internal mentoring scheme? Our mentoring scheme sits under the diversity and inclusion team. It's completely separate from HR. And the scheme aims to open up conversations between people in the organisation who might never normally encounter each other in their roles. It's open to any member of staff in the organisation at any level. We first ran the scheme in 2019 as a bit of a pilot. It was intended to be a pilot of 10 pairs, but there was so much interest that we matched 61 pairs as the pilot, and 53 of those pairs completed 6 months of mentoring. I should say at this point that the BFI Mentoring Scheme owes a great debt to Tamsin and the Museums Association, because I mentored on that scheme and was so inspired by it that I thought, I think I want to set this up in my own organisation. So it's great. As I said, it's open to anybody, and the matches that we make are based on the skills and experience that a mentee is looking to gain. So we ask both sides to fill in an application form and use that information to match them together based on what is available. It's completely agnostic of the hierarchy of the organisation, which is something that's really important, and it's completely outside of line management structures, departments. It's completely open. Our training on the scheme is for both mentors and mentees, and it's supported by Screen Skills, who the BFI funds to deliver various industry support. And one of those areas is mentoring in the wider screen industries. And I've put a couple of quotes from our first year feedback there about how useful people found it. Could I have the next slide, please, Judy? So in 2020, we were planning to run a second round. I'd recruited all my mentors and mentees. I'd matched together about 25 pairs. And we knew at the beginning of the year that we were going to need to look to moving the mentoring online, and for an unknown period of time. So we'd started doing that. Some members of staff in the March had been furloughed because a lot of people at the BFI can't do their jobs from home. I mean, you can't do film conservation in your kitchen. That really is an on-site job. So we knew that some pairs were going to be on hold for a while. And then in May, the organisation did a further round of furlough, as many organisations did. And that included me in my main role, which meant that I could no longer administer the mentoring scheme internally. So the scheme went on a complete pause during that period. I came back to work in late August, but a lot of the organisation was still furloughed. So again, we decided to wait a bit longer. There were a lot of challenges at that time if we had brought the mentoring scheme back. So staff availability was extremely limited. Those who were still at work were obviously balancing a lot of different needs, and a lot of change was happening. It would have been quite difficult to understand people's needs internally during that time. People were redeployed, coming on and off furlough, and those who were returning obviously had a complicated balance of the work that needed to be done. So for all those reasons, I completely put the scheme on hold until this year. Next slide, please, Judy. So in 2021, following on from that pause, there's been a lot of challenges in getting restarted, not least that we're still in a situation where not everybody in the organisation is at work yet. So my first priority was to establish who from last year still wanted to be involved. From this, I learned that a few people had left the organisation in the last year, completely normal turnover. It was important also to check if people's needs had changed. Some have changed jobs within the organisation, new responses to COVID have been happening. So it was really important to make sure that people could still have their needs achieved and to keep the mentoring as useful as possible. I also wanted to make sure that participants were happy to be mentored online. There are some pairings that were planned to focus more on practical skills like film projection. So those are remaining on hold until in-person closer contact is allowed. We've substantially changed how we do our training. So previously we did in-person half-day sessions for mentors and mentees with a lot of interactive exercises and discussion. This isn't really viable on Zoom. So now with the support of Screen Skills, we offer a shorter training session that's recorded so people can watch it back later. There's interactive discussion, but less exercises. I'm also increasing the support that I offer for mentors and mentees. When we were in the office, it was easy for people to just come and find me to talk about their pairing or mentoring in general. So I'm going to be running completely optional monthly drop-ins for that support. And also I'm changing how I manage the cohorts. So last time there was one big cohort and everyone started at once, which was good in some ways and challenging in other ways. But this year I'm going to be starting a smaller number of pairs roughly every quarter to make it easier to accommodate people coming back to work and give more flexibility, and also to make my admin life a little bit easier. And the last slide, please, Judy. So what's happening next is I'm just getting the pairings for this year started. So I've just run the first training, and also we are working a bit with Arts Emergency to promote their mentoring scheme to our staff in the creative industries, which is an excellent segue straight into Carys.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Louise. Carys, take it away.
Thank you, Louise. That's great. We're really looking forward to working with your staff next year. Great. Judy, where are we? Oh yeah, we can skip that slide. I'm from Arts Emergency. So my name's Carys. I'm the head of programmes at Arts Emergency. I've worked at Arts Emergency since 2016. And at that time, I was the second person to join the organisation. And just to give you a kind of idea of the scale of how we've grown in that time, we were supporting about 60 young people at that point a year through our mentoring programmes. And this year we're supporting 350 across the UK. And next year we'll be hopefully supporting 450 mentoring pairs. So we've done a lot of mentoring. We've supported about 1,000 young people in the last 5 years that I've been with Arts Emergency. So who we are. So we're a network, we run a network of people who work within the creative industries. And of course, anyone here is really welcome to join our network. It's free. We all believe that we want to make the creative sector a more equitable place. We know the problems with diversity in the sector. You're twice as likely to work in the creative industries if you come from a more privileged background, and actually the creative industries have the worst social mobility of nearly any industry. So that's why Arts Emergency was established. And it was set up around the time that fees at university went up, and we knew that would put off a lot of young people who were interested in studying the arts and humanities, but maybe wouldn't feel that it was worth kind of doing the degree. So we set up our mentoring programme, and our mentoring programme feeds directly into our young community. So everybody who is part of our mentoring programme continues to get support from Arts and Emergency till they're 26. So that's us really. We currently work in London, Manchester and Merseyside with 16 to 18 year olds, and we also support about 90 young people who are across the country, across the UK. So in terms of our actual mentoring scheme, We work with lots of amazing volunteer mentors. So we've got about 7,000 people in our network, and I would say about 500, 600 of those are trained up to be mentors. And when we have a young person who is a match for them based on their area of interest, we match them up. So if they're interested in architecture, we'd hope to match them with an architect. If they're interested in dance, we'd hope to match them with a dancer. And similar to Tamsin, we take a lot of other things into consideration. So some of our young people might prefer to work with a certain gender or someone who shares their lived experience. And we try to match on that wherever we can. Our volunteers meet once a month over the course of a year. So it generally starts in a January and they finish in a January. They have a intro session. So when we were allowed to meet in person, there would be like 100 pairs meeting for the first time, and it was a big buzz. And we tried to recreate that buzz this year on Zoom. I don't know if it had quite the same effect, but it was still really nice to see everybody. And then at the end of the year, we have a celebration where we welcome the young people into the Young Network because they finished mentoring, but also just celebrate and thank our mentors and celebrate everything they've achieved together. And as I mentioned before, young people continue to get support from Arts Emergency after they finish mentoring with us. So that's what mentoring looks like. Could we move to the next slide, Julie? So we support 16 to 25-year-olds. The majority, I would say, out of the 350 we're working with this year, about 250 of them will be 16 to 18. So they tend to be year 12s or year 13s who are thinking about what they want to do when they leave school. We brought in, during COVID, we decided to redeploy some of our funding to support a cohort of 18 to 25-year-olds because we know how hard that group has been hit during COVID, and so far it's been going really well. So I think that's something we hope to continue in the future. And so we work with lots of different partner organisations to make sure we're reaching young people who wouldn't usually get this kind of support. And our mentors do all the things that mentors do, so you can see all of those things there. They also can, I think what's special about Arts Emergency is our network. So once a month we send out a wish list. So if a mentor pair want to meet someone, you know, in an area of the creative industries that the mentor doesn't have knowledge of, we can introduce them to someone in the network. And so that's how these things kind of feed together. But other than that, they do all the lovely things like help our young people feel confident and understand better the area that they want to pursue. We move to the next slide, Judy. So we've talked, I don't want to repeat too much what everyone else has said today, but I think we all know it's been a really trying time for the creative industries in the last year. For our mentors, a lot of them were furloughed or freelance and left without contracts. So that's been really tough. And for our mentees, they've not been in school, they've not been in university, they've been out of employment. Often a lot of them live at home and there's been very difficult family situations to navigate alongside everything that kind of COVID threw at all of us. So the first thing we did was we moved online. So our mentor pairs met in the January, they came to those big events, they met each other, it was all of a bustle. Then by March, we were all in lockdown. And so we moved everything online with the safeguarding, put lots of safeguarding policies in place to make sure that worked well. Should we move on to the next one, Judy? And I'll talk to you a little bit more. I'm aware of the time, so I'll just gonna run through a few of the different things that we did this year to support mentor pairs throughout the pandemic. So we did have occasional mentor socials in person before, but we tried to make these more regular during the pandemic, and we did things online and we ran training for mentors and just gave mentors a time to kind of chat and kind of have that sense of community. We send out monthly emails to mentors and to mentees, and we really packed them full of opportunities and things that they could still get involved with. We did put together a lot of resources on wellbeing, and we also did a lot of work to try and, as quickly as we can, break down government guidance around education, because that was really confusing, especially for people who are doing A-levels or their BTECs, trying to understand what was happening with that and how it would work, so that our mentors had that information and our young people were better able to advocate to their school, you know, actually I'm expecting this, and so on. We did have a problem with digital poverty. Most of our young people were able to either find a phone they could use if they couldn't use the internet. And so we sent out a lot of headphones to young people who were kind of lacking privacy in the places where they lived. Our staff did a lot of phone calls to vulnerable young people so that we could make sure that we were also better able to support that young person and the mentor if they were up against it. I think there were a couple of other things on that last slide, but I can't remember what they are. They might not have been that important. Oh, we did 70 online work experience placements so that we could try and make sure that young people still got those opportunities. Some of them were with their mentor. And yeah, we sent out lots of creative packs and did workshops and whatnot. That's great, Judy. And yeah, so 90% of pairs finished the year. And I do wonder how that will look this year, because these are mentor pairs that did meet in person and then went online. And I wonder how it's going to work, because our mentor pairs this year that started in January met online, and hopefully by the end of the year will be in person. So we'll see how that works. It was definitely a much more pastoral year. It seemed to us that the pairs met more often, but usually for a bit less time. Yeah, most mentor pairs offered on average an extra 2 sessions to their young people. And I would say that the understanding of the creative industries and wasn't as high as usual, which is understandable because they couldn't actually get out and see them. But actually the biggest impact we had last year was on people feeling a bit more positive and connected and less alone during the pandemic. And that was for mentors and for mentees, feeling part of something. And yeah, so 88% felt more prepared for the future and 44% finished work experience, which we're really pleased. That's one of our big metrics. So we're really pleased we still managed to make that happen. And that was in large part due to mentors pushing for it. So that's what it looked like last year. And this is from our manifesto: the future is another place, allow yourself to believe a better life is possible, say it loud, defiantly to everyone. So always pop that in, because that's kind of the way we kind of our vision going forward.
Thank you so much, Carys. And it is such a positive view to have and to think forward in terms of how mentoring makes an impact. So we've heard from our 4 panelists and a little bit about the research, the empirical evidence we know about mentoring in the sector. And now we're delighted to take questions. I will stop sharing because I think that's going to make it easier. And I know James sent me some questions. So let me just think. I will get to those questions. So I don't know if Grania McGuire is here. Grania there? No. That's such a shame, because Grania had asked a question. I'm interested to hear the panel's opinions on the particular approach to giving support to creative people.
Judy, hi, I am here.
Hello, how are you?
Hello. Very well, thank you.
It's lovely to hear from you, because Grania was actually a mentor on one of the schemes I ran several years ago. So it's lovely to get your question. Do you want to actually ask your question and then we can offer it out to the panel?
Well, I was really interested to, obviously I do profiling and there's lots of different type of people that we mentor. However, I was really interested in the insight of the panel to how to best support creative people, because obviously it's quite different than your run-of-the-mill corporate person that you're mentoring. That was my question. What different approaches do you use to support mentoring a creative person?
I think that's really interesting. Who would like to come in with those kind of, in response to Grania's question? Yeah, Tamsin, great.
think it's a great question because I've never thought of it in those terms. I think everyone's creative. Every time you develop something, that's a creative process. So I've not, and we have multiple roles, like 200 different roles within museums, and some of those are more creative and less creative. So my advice always to my mentors is to follow their lead. So what we might do is ask them to do a reflection of how best they learn, in terms of whether they're structured or whether they're more emergent, how best they learn in terms of, are they more theorist or are they more visual, and think about their learning process and how it relates to their own professional practice. And then the mentor follows their lead in that, because the person knows best. So it's not probably a great answer, but that's the approach we take, which is very bespoke.
Okay, thank you, Tamsin.
Anyone else? Oh, yes, please, Jo.
I think what occurs to me, Grania, is despite what we've been hearing on the media this year, in fact, people who make things for a living, many of our mentees and mentors have actually not much felt like doing it some of the time. So I think that's been a bit of a crisis point for some people. Why is it I don't actually feel like playing music, and if you don't have an audience there, or you don't have an outlet for that, or even just playing together with colleagues and friends, that's been a huge gap. So I think confidence, keeping confidence up, and just keeping contact and finding other ways of being creative. So as Tamsin, I think, was saying earlier, getting creative online, learning how to record yourself more and communicate things is not the same, but I think just keeping some kind of thread of whatever it is that you feel you can do, keeping something going.
Excellent, thank you, Jo.
I think that's really interesting aspects, because often we haven't felt like doing the things we normally would love to do. And picking up on Tamsin's point, I mean, I teach an awful lot of coaching and mentoring people, and some of them talk about the real difference it is with working with those who work in the creative industries compared to those who don't. And it's maybe something actually that we could actually do more work on, that would be really fascinating. Yeah, Louise.
I was just going to say, I think it's interesting because obviously I'm working with staff of an organisation, and I think some of the staff would see themselves as working in the creative industries, and some of the staff really wouldn't see themselves as working in the creative industries. And I would say, I would agree with Tamsin that I don't really take a particularly different approach to either of those groups. And it is really mentee led, and we do spend a lot of time in the training kind of asking the mentees to focus on what they want to get from it. We ask, if you could get if mentoring was going to be great for you, what would the outcome look like? And to communicate that to their mentor, so that works for any type of person, creative or not, I think. And then that leads the conversation. And I do ask a few questions in the sign-ups about what your approach to problem solving might be. Do you prefer to look at the details or the wider picture? And some of that is used to match people, so that if people are looking for challenge or not, they get that. But it's I would say I agree with Tamsin. I don't see it as a different approach necessarily.
Okay, thank you very much, Louise.
So thanks for that question, Grania. We've also got another question that was sent in by Carl Schoenfeld. He said, I'd be interested to find out how universities, perhaps working with local councils, art centres and LEPs, can provide a platform for production companies and freelancers to regroup and share experiences in restarting, settling into new ways of working, finding new clients and funding sources and building resilience. So I suppose this is really about the networks that we're used to, sometimes very consciously creating as part of our mentoring schemes. I wondered if anybody would talk about kind of the networks that have come around from the initial mentoring activities that you've developed. Everyone's having it. Go on, Carys, thank you.
I think what's been really nice is seeing the different ways our mentors have been able to support each other when we've brought together those when we've brought people together during the pandemic. And also we have quite an active Twitter feed, so quite often our mentors will put up a question about, you know, my mentee needs this kind of support, and actually we kind of crowdsource quite a lot of advice and support. And so I think it has been nice during the pandemic to, I think, feel mentors and people part of our network to feel part of something positive. And yeah, that's what I would say probably about our network.
Thanks, Carys. It is that important thing about connecting people, isn't it? Sorry, Tamsin, you were just going to come in.
It's just along the lines of also just enabling agency through them. So some of my mentees have wanted to start their own groups, and that's great. I don't need to be there. I don't have the capacity to be here. So I think once you've got a group of people that are on a learning journey and know what that means for them and what their goals are, which is all part of those individualistic mentoring discussions, then actually if somebody does want to collect a group to talk about resilience, fundraising, all those sort of things, actually in a way they become a self-directed group, and they themselves can arrange a Zoom platform to have a conversation and exchange those ideas, because I truly believe we do have the answers to all our own questions, but it's about getting the right talent in the room. So I would sort of change the approach that let the mentees do that, let that become agency for them, and self-directed groups and networks, rather than it being collated or developed by a scheme owner, for want of a better description.
Yeah. Yes, go on, Jo, thanks.
Very briefly, yes, a few ideas have come to me this year about how we could use the programme as a resource in the future. So, for example, existing mentees or former mentees could become sources of support for new mentees in the future, either informally or in a group. I don't really know how yet, but I think that might have been something which would have come in real life eventually, but this has made me more aware of the possibilities for that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jo. We've had one more question that I know Louise has partially tackled. We might just be able to squeeze in another view on it. So Lindsay Steenberg, who's one of the members of the film studies team, she'd love to hear more about the gender divide in the official mentoring programs. I know what my view is going to be of that, but I'll hand it over to whoever else would like to comment on that particular challenge that we often face as mentoring scheme coordinators. Who'd like to have a go at that one? Yeah, go on, Carys, thank you.
We're predominantly female identified mentors and mentees actually at Arts Emergency. One thing I would say, it was interesting to me hearing that you had mainly male mentors and then female mentees, because actually I ran a mentoring programme before this at the University of Arts London, and it was all women volunteers pretty much, but actually at Arts Emergency we do have, you know, I would say probably maybe 40% male identifying mentors, and so it's actually a lot more balanced on the volunteer side than I have experienced when volunteer managing in other places. Yeah, so, and I think that's kind of how it shapes out. I know we talked a little bit about this, Judy, when we were speaking about who's running mentor schemes as well, and you know, it has been interesting to me. We've Tian, who works in Manchester, he's male identifying, and him running that mentor scheme and doing those care things, it's interesting to me seeing like how the dynamics sometimes are different. I think probably talking about gender and mentoring could be a whole seminar in itself, because you know, who's doing the caring, who's encouraged to care, who is being encouraged to talk about their emotions and sign up to talk about their emotions. I think there's a lot embedded in that, and actually, you know, yeah, I don't know. I would have to formulate my thoughts on it, but I think that there's a lot of dynamics at play that make it. But I have been pleased at Arts Emergency how we have been trying to like push to have a really wide variety of volunteers.
Yeah. Brilliant, brilliant. I think that's definitely something that will we'll discuss it another day, and hopefully and have another opportunity as a panel to discuss. A huge thank you once again to Dr. Jo Miller, to Tamsin Russell, to Carys Nelkon, and to Louise McAward-White, and to everybody who's joined us. I hope you've enjoyed this session, and yes.
Thanks, Judy. Thank you very much for chairing, Judy, and thanks to all the panelists. It's been really interesting, and just hearing about the work you do is it's really inspiring, actually. So thank you for coming. And I hope everybody in the audience enjoyed it as much as we did. So please come along to more events, and we'll see you all very soon. Thank you.